Welcome back, pet parent. Today we're doing something a little different for this show, but I promise it's going to be worthwhile because so many of us, and I'm just like, we all knew this, but we actually have studies that show so many of us are not prepared for what it actually costs to care for our pets. And I think that's really been super top of mind, especially in the last few years, because we have all been really trying to figure things out with inflation. And oh my gosh, the numbers for what things cost now versus how much income has gone up is just insanity. And caring for our pets is something I know you listening it's all you want to do is make sure you're taking care of your pet as well as you can. So one of the things I know Isabel and I have talked about it before on the weekly pet roundup. So if you caught the episode we did on pet insurance, this is going to kind of tie in a little bit here. So it's probably been 5 or 6 years maybe since I got a CareCredit credit card. And I'm sure we all use credit cards in different ways. Sometimes we use them when we really don't want to have to use them. But the way I use it, literally for anything I need veterinary care wise. But there are other ways that you can use it.
Yeah.
I set it aside and I only use it for veterinary expenses. And I also have a dedicated savings account for veterinary expenses. But sometimes things happen. I have been there many, many times. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and some of the things that we can do as pet parents to prepare. One of those things being like actually understanding what the lifetime of care can be for having a dog or a cat. So today's guest is Jonathan Wainberg, and he is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of the pet and the co-brand business at Synchrony, which is the CareCredit card that I was just talking about. And he has a very extensive resume in finance. I'm not going to bore you with all of that because he's actually a lot more interesting than his resume leads one to believe. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here with me today.
No, you don't worry. I'm happy. I'm more interesting than a piece of paper. And you can see I got Maddie here, and Maddie's my miniature. Well, she's 14 years old, and she sits with me all day during work, and she sleeps for about 95% of my meetings. So it's also boring in real life, but it's important work.
Yeah, well, it is. You know, the world needs to go around, and money is how we do that. And it's, I know for a lot of us, been an exceptional struggle in the past few years. Maddie, much like my dog Kimberly, who has been barking her head off as we have been trying to record this episode, they don't have any clue about what money is or how it works or how we get through the world. God bless them, because I wish I could be like that. I wish so much. But that just isn't the reality of the world we live in. And we're certainly not going to get at all political here today. We really just want to talk about what we can do proactively and when something happens, because I was reviewing some of the information that you sent over, and we'll get to all of that about specialty veterinary care and the lifetime of care study that Synchrony put out. But I would love to hear a little bit, Jonathan, about your dog Maddie and some of the things, because I know you've been through a lot together. So I would love to hear a little bit more about Maddie.
Of course. Well, Maddie is a 14 and a half year old miniature poodle. And she is a very, worldly dog. She started living with us from a puppy, right away, about 6 weeks. But about 18 months into her life with us, we moved to Hong Kong. So she lived in Hong Kong with us for 2 years. And then after 2 years, I got asked to move to London. And so she lived with us in London, where I worked for 5 years. And then she was back in New York for a bit. And now we're based in Florida. So she's been living in a bunch of different places. She's been to, I think, 13 countries. We have a little pet passport for her. So she gets around. But she really is, my right-hand lady. And really a great part of the family. But as a senior dog, she struggles with some health conditions, which are not uncommon in for her breed. she has Cushing's. And she also has a mitral valve deficiency. So she gets, she's, has lived a great, healthy life so far. And there's things now that we need to change, whether it be behaviors or certain treatments that she needs to do to continue to be a part of our family for as long as we hope she can be. And, with that also, as we're going to talk about later, comes cost. But that's life these days, right?
It is. It really, really is. And I'm curious because one of the things we talk about on this podcast a lot is getting back to nature and bringing in holistic modalities to care for our pets. Of all the places you've lived and Maddie has lived, in my mind, I'm thinking the least access to like natural space she might have had was in Hong Kong. But I don't know. Of all the places she's lived, where does she get the most access to nature?
In London is where she had her most access. Hong Kong was great, but it was very much, it's packed, right? And so she spent a lot of time, and real estate comes with a very high premium. And so she spent a lot more time on pavement. In London, which was incredibly dog friendly, right? So she would, she was a regular at the pub. She tried to get in with fake ID to buy. They didn't count dog years for her to be able to buy a beer. But in London, we lived very near Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens, and she would be off leash. And then it wasn't uncommon. We would take her up to Scotland when we went there, and she would just run around. And so that was probably where she had her biggest opportunity to be in nature. I'd say that came with a plus and a minus because in Hyde Park in London, she would quite often, when we'd let her off her leash, she would then proceed as quickly as possible to the nearest fox poo and rub her back in it. And she would come back, and invariably we'd have to give her a nice deep cleaning. I guess that was her natural instinct, and she just loved doing it.
It is. You should look into FMT.
Yeah.
We pay a premium for healthy poop these days.
Okay, I'm going to look into it. But that was something that you would always come back, and right when, my wife would take her on a walk, she'd come back to our place. She'd be like, no, you can't pet her. We got to get a bath. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, no, I get it. I would have to do that too. So, okay, she does have some issues that you have to manage. And not only do you have to manage those issues, but that comes along with, and I know so many people get so frustrated about this, but it's very necessary to continue monitoring lab work, especially when an animal or a human for that matter is on medications, because there are a lot of side effects and we need to mitigate that as much as possible. So there is a high price tag for that. And do you use CareCredit?
I do. And I use it, for precisely those kind of reasons. Is the monitoring more than, the initial diagnostic, probably costs money, but making sure her levels are right with her Cushing's is very important. So her cortisol levels, to make sure that, she's in that, healthy spot and is at the right place. The other expense, which is not insignificant, is I need to take her to the cardiologist for her mitral valve deficiency. I'd say I take her about 3 times a year. And with that is, it's not even medicine, right? It's an EKG to see if her heart murmur is getting stronger, or if her aorta and the other parts of her ventricles and her heart are weakening, right? And that takes it's like a 4 or 5 hour appointment, and we make a little bit of a day of it, me and her, right? And because we got to drive also about an hour for the specialist. But yeah, I use CareCredit all the time, and then I just happen to have to use it again over the holiday time. I don't want to embarrass her on your podcast, but she had a ruptured anal gland. We do, treat them and get them normally expressed, but she had to go in for a little bit of emergency treatment over the break. She's doing great now, but that was something that, as we'll talk about, was completely unexpected, right? You can't plan on that.
Yeah, well, I actually pulled up a quote from you in... Cool. It was published back in October on Synchrony's website about how prepared we are as pet parents, especially for the cost of specialty veterinary care. And you said, nearly 50% of today's pet parents underestimate the cost of pet care, and unexpected emergency care plays a big role in this miscalculation. I've been there. I have had so many, I've had so many pets, and I think, we can certainly get lost in like the cost of one pet can be astronomical, especially if that pet has serious issues, whether they're genetic or, whatever else may be going on. We talk a lot about vaccinosis and things like that here on this podcast, but the sheer amount of pets that I have had in my life, I have been through so much. Cryptorchid surgeries and resistant bacterial infections. I have had a cat who got blocked multiple times, urinary blockages, and I got him a perennial urethrostomy surgery, which in its own, like just the surgery was like $5,000. I have had a cat in intensive care for a week who went septic. Like there are so many things. My most recent issue, which actually surprisingly was not a huge expense for me, but I think that comes with the line of work I do now and caring for my pets a little more naturally. But I did have to get him diagnostics for osteosarcoma, which was out of nowhere. And, I didn't know until he broke his leg, right? So it's just been like you learn, you live and you learn. And as we were talking about on the like pre-podcast meeting that we had, you were talking to me about how many new pet parents we have, like people who they are just getting their first pet ever. And possibly with the pandemic, that kind of exacerbated those numbers, what they would normally be in a generation, because we were all at home. And like, what are we going to do? I'm lonely. Get me a pet, right? So just understanding what it actually costs to care for a pet. And I have to say, I would say your numbers are on the low end, but I think that's because I, work with people who do care for pets more holistically, and that can be more expensive. But I'm just wondering if you'd like to talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think also, Jessica, there's a different level. There's a spectrum of care, and then there's the level of, bonding that certain pet parents have with their pets, which you're probably on a different level of it's not judging. It's not, it's just the way that a central role in your family is maybe a little bit different than other people. Same thing with me and Matt. She, we all work for her here, right? I would have been retired years ago, but she's just tough. But listen, I think a couple things, starting with the first-time pet parents. Yes, I think a lot of people got pets at a accelerated rate, than normally. And so we saw that population grow, and they are not prepared for what, usually you learn after your first pet, you learn all, how to teach them, how to train them better. How do you teach them how to sit? How do what food do you might want to be better at? And then the other thing is you learn about expenses and how much it actually costs. And so we're having a much larger population of the pet parents that don't have that first time experience. That's number one. Number two is that when you think about the expense and the kind of the health of a pet, you have like, okay, starting off in the beginning when you get them and whether, which vaccines and, whatever you decide to do as a pet parent, the startup costs tend to be higher, getting your, whatever it is, a crate, the dog bed, all that stuff. The first year tends to be high. Then you tend to, go down a little bit, years 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they start going up, because that's when dogs start to age and, depending on the breed in particular, but certainly the larger ones at a more accelerated rate. Maybe some of the snub-nosed ones start to have breathing difficulties at that point. And so we're now starting to see that age come from the pandemic pet boom is now starting to hit also. So people need to be prepared even more so. And then the third factor, which we talked about, is just costs have gone up, number one, and number two, savings have gone down. So when you put those two things together, and with that, the financial piece of it, with savings going down and costs going up, and then the other elements, it's a very important topic to talk about at this time.
Well, and the other thing that this particular blog post says is that 80% of pet parents are worried about the potential cost of veterinary care as much or possibly more than the outcome of getting or not getting the care, which is never a place we want to be, but it's the reality of the world we live in and where we're at. And I know that in one hand, we think, oh, that poor animal isn't getting the care they need. On the other hand, it could be that animal being relinquished to a shelter or a rescue. And those services also, they need support. They need help. They're always over full, over their limit on what they can handle and what they can take. It's just, it's sad. And I know it also, I think I wouldn't be doing a service to my community, especially with all of the veterinarians that I'm fortunate to be friends with, and even some who mentor me. It puts a strain on the veterinary profession, everybody in the vet, whether it's a veterinarian or a tech or whoever else, because we are seeing that I think they have actually surpassed the air traffic controllers as the profession with the highest suicide rate. They are overworked, they are burnt out, and they get yelled at and cussed out and crapped on all day long from people who are angry with how much it costs. And it's really not the veterinarian's fault. They're literally trying to stay afloat. They're not becoming millionaires doing what they do. And so I think it's important to bring that piece in when we're sitting here talking about how expensive it is.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. The costs are not high arbitrarily, right?
Sure.
Right. I think that there is people who work, whether it's vets or vet techs, need to earn a living wage, and they bear the brunt. They are, the people that, speak pet, if you will, and know how to diagnose and make sure that our pets are being cared for. And I think that's a very important equation to it. I think that, the stat that I have in that release that you read was that 4 to 5 pets in their lifetime will experience an emergency, and that 80% of those pet parents are as worried about the outcome as they are on the cost. And you're absolutely right. That's an unhealthy equation, right? What you have over there. People should be focused more, shouldn't have to focus on what this is going to cost me, especially when you're going through it. Yes, there's cost to doing all this stuff. And so it's very important that we try to find a way to get people to be prepared so that when that pet is having an emergency and when you're stressed in that vet clinic or wherever you are, where this is taking place, you're not focused solely on the health and well-being of that family member as opposed to the cost.
Okay. So some of the other statistics that I saw in the Lifetime of Care study that Synchrony came out with, which is just full of incredible information. And I want to talk about the 1 year cost of pet ownership, because that's where I was like, really, that's all? But for a dog, it spanned $1,270 to $2,803. And for a cat, $961 to $2,487. Excuse me. And I'm over here like, how do I get down to these numbers? It's not going to happen for me. But in the same study, we're looking at where is the statement? Let me find it again. It's like $250, I think it says.
Yes, is the area where it begins to stress people, right? So
yes.
25% of pet parents, a $250 emergency is enough to create financial stress, I think is that stat. And everyone has different savings and incomes and economic profiles, right, and backgrounds. $250 is not what it used to be, and that's a scary number for it to cause stress, because even that isn't going to get you that much nowadays in an emergency in a vet, and so that's a scary number, and I think we're gonna be refreshing this study, I believe, this year, and so I wouldn't be surprised if that number jumps in a not insignificant amount, but I don't know the results yet.
Yeah, well, and I know for my pets, I spend a whole lot more upfront with them. And that's one of the things we talk about a lot on this podcast, because it is very difficult when we have somebody sitting in front of us going, I can't afford to do XYZ. And I get it. Like, I totally understand. I've been there more times than I would like to count or go back and remember. And the reality is, prevention can get us so far. I mean, obviously it can't ever guarantee us anything. We live in a toxic world. There are genetic things that we have to account for. But one of the reasons that I have CareCredit is because it's so versatile. And I certainly don't want this to sound like a commercial for CareCredit, but obviously that's what we're here to talk about, is being prepared and having something to kind of ease that stress, ease the anxiety that you have. And I will say, for me, it has eased that anxiety after having been through so many multi-$1,000 specialty vet bills, to know that, okay, even if I don't have this in my savings account right now, I have this card that's going to help me get through this, and I'll figure it out on the other side, because that's what my pet means to me. So I don't know if there are any other statistics that we want to talk about. I have plenty of them pulled up. I'm sure you do too. But
Yeah.
that's kind of, the prevention and the anxiety, like reducing that anxiety. That's where I'm kind of, my mind circles back around to all the time.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things you hit on, whether it be just now or when we started off, right? You talked about that you have a CareCredit card, but you also talked about having a pet savings account, right?
Mm-hmm.
A little bit, I know you had another guest on talking about insurance. CareCredit used to own Pets Best Insurance, and now we're a large, we have a partnership with Independent Pet Holdings, which also owns Embrace and ASPCA and some other, FIGO, Spot, a bunch of other insurance brands, and Pumpkin. And so, we have, I have some, kind of experience in that space as well. What I'd say is there's not going to be one fail-safe solution. So it's a matter of building a quilt work of things or a bunch of different layers of defense to help you be prepared. I think, listen, budgeting is very important, right? So budgeting for what you need, which is a big reason why we did this Lifetime of Care study, because we wanted people to know. It wasn't to scare people. A lot of people at first, when we released this, we're talking almost 2.5 years ago now, right? I believe the initial study. Everyone's like, what are you trying to scare people not get pets? No, that's not it at all. We want educated, pet parents that understand what kind of relationship they're getting into. Like you said in the beginning, like the pets don't know how much each thing costs. Although I will tell you, for some reason, Maddie, every time I give her like one of these bones, she'll bury it with her nose into into the couch or all over. I find bones are all over the house. I'm like, she's the only dog here. I don't know what she's saving for. No one's stealing her bones. And, she's 14 now. No one else is eating. Guarantee you that. She still doesn't trust me. But what I'd say is it's having multiple ways. So understanding the costs, step one, understanding, what you're getting yourself into, and understanding also that it's a privilege to have a pet in your family, but it's also a responsibility and a covenant that you're signing up for, that you agree to give them that care, right? Number one. Number two, it's budgeting for it, right? And as much as you can. It's never going to be perfect, right? We talk about unexpected expenses and the cost that has and the stress. But what we know as pet parents is chances are you're going to have an emergency in that lifetime. Right. We talk about it in the study. 4 to 5 pet parents have, in their lifetime will have a pet emergency. And then sometimes it might not be an emergency, but you might think it is. And still it'll be an emergency expense, right? Because we tend to at times because we don't speak pet and we don't understand what they're going through. Sometimes, we maybe bring them to that an extra time that isn't necessary, but you're just worried about it. Right. So, understanding, yes, there's going to be a surprise, but you shouldn't be surprised that there's going to be a surprise. It's more about when it is as opposed to that it will happen. You talk about pet savings accounts that, or having a savings account, a rainy day fund, whatever you want to call it in case that happens. Right? Pet insurance helps in certain cases, right? Especially depending on, when you get it in their life cycle and what kind of policy and what works for you and how you decide to treat them and what's covered. So study that. But pet insurance is another great tool in that. And then CareCredit and having that ability to have that line of credit and be able to pay it over time is another very valuable tool. A lot of people use the CareCredit card, like you say, it's my pet's credit card. I reserve it for that pet for an emergency. In some cases, it's treated almost like self-insurance. In case something's going to happen, you know that you have that card and it's going to be able to pay. So being prepared to have that CareCredit card, as opposed to when you're either on your way to the emergency vet or at 2 a.m. and scrambling, yes, you can still apply at the vet, and you can apply 24 hours, and the decisioning is very rapid, right? For getting the card. But, we see more and more, what I've seen a big shift over the last few years is people taking out that card at either the point of adoption or earlier on, because as you mentioned, it's not just for emergencies. People bring their pets to the vet numerous times a year, and it works for those times. Now it's accepted even in daycare and other places, which is a good product. And I would say, the last thing that you mentioned, which is as important, is preventative health. Like you mentioned, putting aside the financing part, it's kind of like if you think about human health insurance, right? There's a reason why our annual physical, you don't pay, you generally a copay, or, it's because they want to know that you're going to the doctor. People that maybe go to the doctor or go to the vet tend to be, more attuned with their health. And you can also catch things earlier on, and that they're doing it. It's a behavioral thing almost as much as it is an actual thing. And so that's important for the pet as well. So wellness, whether it's a wellness plan or just regular vet visits, right? And or like, I know, holistic, or however you do it. Diet, I know, is something, Jessica, that you're very passionate about as well, right? Making sure that you're doing everything in your power that can reduce the risk of an emergency or more acute health issues.
Yeah, well, and that is another thing that we kind of spoke about previously, is the versatility of the card, because you're not locked into like you can only use it here, right? Not only can you use it for your pet's expenses, but you can use it in other medical care as well for yourself. I know like my dentist takes it and places like that. So it really can be one of those things. Again, I'm going to come back to the mental health aspect of it, because that's where I am focused so much in my life right now, is on my mental health and reducing anxiety, reducing stress, and knowing that I'm not going to be stuck in a situation where I can't get my pet the care they need. Even though in the moment I'm still going to be stressed out, like, let's be real, I'm not always thinking about I'm not going to be able to do it, which is something that I remember feeling in the past. So I don't take that for granted. Of course, as I said earlier, I have a pet savings account also that I have an automatic transfer set up, and I don't think about it, and I don't look at that account until I need it. Like, I just know that money is going into it, and that's a blessing. I understand that that's something that, we're all in different tax brackets here, I'm sure, but it's something I set up a couple of years ago, and I haven't looked at it since. At first, it felt hard to me at first, and now that I've had it set up and in place for so long, I don't even think about it anymore. I'll log into my bank and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, I have that, right? So all the prevention, and as you said, knowing what you're getting into, that's one of the things that it's really, really easy for somebody who has such a soft heart for animals to just want to take them all in. I've been there too. I know I have said this before, so it's not going to shock too many people, but it may shock you. 15, almost 15 years ago, I had 12 cats. That's a lot. That's a lot to care for. And at the time, they were like 4 or 5 different veterinary prescription foods I was buying. Like, it was expensive because we care so much for these animals. And what I have learned, and what I want to pass on to anybody who's ready to hear it, is that we actually aren't helping them if we can't take care of them. So we have to realize what our limits are And what I have found has helped me, because I am so empathetic to all of the animals out there, is finding ways to help other people who are helping animals. And that kind of, it still makes me feel good in a way. Like, it's definitely not the, dog cuddling up next to you on the couch feeling, but there are things we can do. So being realistic about what it actually takes financially to take care of an animal, even if you're raising them allopathically, even if you're feeding them kibble. I mean, at least you're feeding them. And knowing what that number is, budgeting for it, like you said, that is, I wish more people knew to do that. It's not just that initial cost. And I am such a big proponent for having labs done on your dog, or your cat. A lot of veterinarians don't ask you to do this until they get later in life. And I want it done early in life because I want to be able to compare what's normal for this animal versus something has happened and now we need to do labs. And we have no idea what's normal for that animal. And we're just looking at a snapshot in time. So just having these resources, I think is really helpful. And I'm glad you put this information out. Do you have any other tips for people on how they can utilize your services, or where can they get this information so they can go through it and see if they're prepared?
Sure. I think a couple of things. To echo your point, knowledge is power, right? And this is, as even though they're not human, are for the vast majority, and it keeps people see the great benefit that pets not only bring our health, right? Because that goes under, understudied, or, I know that there's some organization, ABRI, that, are stressing, what that animal bond and how much all the great, results from our health result from it. But they're a part of your family. And even if you think at first, oh no, it's not going to be that way, trust me, for the vast majority, it's great. Americans are fully, embracing the benefits of having a pet in your household. And, talk about COVID during that time. As much as we wanted someone near us, it was the pet parents that were less lonely. It was the ones, they were able to get outside and walk. And you really saw those benefits when they did those studies. So, just be prepared, because you are going to want to spend more on that pet than you probably think you are, because they're just such an integral part of the household. I think when you're talking about, your mental health, and one of your goals is to eliminate some of those stresses and things, that's why I think being prepared, having whatever it is, like we talked about, budgeting, preventative, CareCredit before, is so important. Is something's going to happen. Don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be stressed. Yes, no matter what, you're going to be stressed because your family member is having some sort of medical emergency, or going through something in the health when you need the card potentially. But, and you're always going to be stressed about, but remove one element of the stress, right? That's what we're saying. There's not an annual fee to use CareCredit. You apply, there's no, you know what I mean? So having it in your back pocket is a great thing, and will help you remove that stress. And what we also like to think is through the deferred financing promotions that we offer, where you have the ability to not have to pay interest for 6, 12 months, as far as 2 years in the vet space and beyond in some of the other markets, is incredibly valuable, especially where interest rates are these days, right? So that's a real big benefit as well, and able to kind of section it off. Yes, it's, to your point, it's not just for pets. It's very much accepted in the dental industry, right? Think about things that aren't necessarily covered by human health insurance is typically where we have a larger presence. So braces are obviously, kind of something big. If you guys caught my 7-year-old son poking his hand in during the interview, and before, if he poked his mouth, you would have seen like one of his little teeth coming in sideways. And I'm like, oh boy, I better have my card ready for this in another 5 years, because I'm going to have to get some work done there. It's big in the cosmetic space, chiropractor, mental health. It's accepted across the board in over, I think it's approximately 275,000 locations in the US, right? And in the veterinary market, we're accepted in around 85% of the vets take it. And it's not something where it's limited to what services you kind of get at the vet. So if there's a prescription diet or medicine at the vet or the treatment and stuff like that, it's just as long as it's used in that network. So it's not like tied to any formularies or certain tests. So that gives you the flexibility to, kind of use it for your needs. You can go to carecredit.com to apply. I think that's the easiest kind of way. And there's like a drop down box. You could pick veterinary, but it's not limited to that specialty. So if you already have a card and used it in the dental industry and it's maybe somewhere in a drawer, if you had your laser eye surgery done 4 years ago and you're like, okay, you have it, you can it still works across the network, right? Which is great. But if you go to carecredit.com, you could apply, or in your vet clinic, we're in so many of them and it's very easy to apply. You take a picture of the QR code in most vets, or they can help walk you through some of it. It's a very quick decisioning process. And it's not, doesn't do a hard credit check at first, right? So you could pre-qualify without, it showing up on your credit score. And then if you're interested in moving forward based on, the approval and the terms and the limits, you could then go and it becomes a reusable credit card. And I think what's important is the reusable element of it, because people have multiple pets, right? And people have multiple use cases. And so it's not one of these, buy now, pay later type products where if your credit is good, then you can use it. But if your credit changes in 6 months and you don't get approved, that's a little bit risky. So having, more of a reusable line is something that I think is a real benefit to this, in particular in the vet kit, because we know that pets are going to go to the vet multiple times per year.
They are. And that was what you said earlier. One of the things that I did want to point out, one of the biggest differences that I find in having pet insurance and having a CareCredit card is not that, obviously you could use them together, but so many pet insurances do not cover holistic modalities. And CareCredit doesn't care what you're getting done at the vet. It's just that vet accepts it, right?
Yeah, accepted at the vet. So there's different, different alternative approaches to caring for your pet, not judging on which is the right or the wrong is accepted. I think the pet insurance space, pet insurance is a good product, but I think you're right. I think there is ways to improve on more of the holistic modalities, and that's something that I'm certainly going to take back to the people that I work with, because it's you got to understand what your market needs, and Jessica, you're not alone in the way that you care for your pet. I know you have a strong following, but I have family members, friends that are also very much into it, and they're like, oh, which pet insurance does it cover? This is cover this, and it's happening more and more, and it's not a fad, right? It's something that's here and is not without merit, and so we got to make sure that's out there. I'd say the one last thing, not the last thing, but one other thing that does work well with CareCredit and Pets Best Insurance now, and I'll start rolling out to other insurance brands that IPH owns, is the ability to do direct reimbursement of your claims. So we launched it towards the end of last year, and it's going to be expanding beyond, but it's with Pets Best now, Pets Best Insurance. And that's, the way that pet insurance works in the US is a reimbursement method, right? And so you go send your bill, and then you wait for a claim to be decided upon, and then you get reimbursed. So what we've built now is, it's patent pending, but it's the first in the industry, is where you'll use your CareCredit card, and then you'll file your, claim with Pets Best. And once it's decisioned, you get reimbursed directly on your CareCredit card. And so it'll pay off, to the extent it could pay off the balance. But if it matches, it pays off your balance, and it pays that off right away. So it removes the step number one, and it allows for the pet parent to make sure that they're paying off that, balance on their credit card before the end of that promotional period. So they're benefiting for that. So it's something that, makes life easier, and also the veterinarians love, because it just helps that behind the scenes.
Yeah, that would make it so much easier. Well, I am so thankful that your PR team reached out to me. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and I will make sure that the current lifetime of care study, as well as specifically the specialty veterinary care blog that's on the Synchrony website, are linked in the show notes, because I think that information is very valuable for people to kind of get an idea. I mean, if you're on your 10th pet, you do have kind of an idea, but there are so many first-time pet parents that do not. They just do not. And I think even if we are not first-time pet parents, we know somebody who is a first-time pet parent and we can forward this information to them. Again, as Jonathan said, not as like a fear tactic, but as I care about you, and like we just need to make sure we're all on the same page and we've got this handled, we've got this covered kind of thing. So want to thank you again, Jonathan, for being here, for talking to my audience, for helping them prepare a little bit more, because that is definitely something we can all use a little bit more of.
No, well, thank you so much for having me and welcoming me on the call and allowing me to, share what I know and, what I believe. And listen, I say I'd end on two things. First of all, once our new study comes out, it'll be interesting to see where that changes. And I'm happy to, update you guys and your audience on that if it makes sense when the time comes. And then just a thank you to you and everything you do for the pet community. I know it's something that, listening to your other shows and reading up about you and learning about you. It's thank you so much for what you do for the community and educating. And this is something that I know you dedicate so much of your time and your life to. So you're helping, and it means a lot. And maybe sometimes doesn't get as noticed as much as it should.
That's so kind of you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Well, I hope that Maddie and your son are both happy, healthy. I wish them all the best. Your son watching
healthy chicken, so she's excited also. She deserves some, right?
So I want to say thank you again. I really appreciate you coming on and being so open with the information to help prepare people. And I hope Maddie has a great healthy life in front of her. I know she's already 14 and a half, but we can get a lot. We can get a lot out of these fur babies, and they deserve it. So thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, guys, y'all have a great rest of your week. Thanks so much for being here, and I will talk to you next week.